This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at wrfl.fm. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Hi, and welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Lhotka. Today in studio, we have Laurie Thomas. Laurie is an extension forester in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. It's a pleasure to have you back in the studio today.
Yeah, it's great being here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So today we're going to talk about what is a tree.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
It's a great topic.
Yeah. So if you've missed any of Laurie's past shows, I encourage you to listen to those. She's been a guest on our show. She's talked about fall colors and Christmas trees and backyard bird count.
Project Feeder Watch.
Right, awesome. So before we talk about that, what is a tree? Tell us a little bit about what you do at UK and why you got interested in trees.
All right. Well, as you said, I'm an extension forester, which means I do forestry education, and I help educate landowners but primarily youth. I do a lot of my programming, educational, natural resource education with the youth around the state through programs like 4-H Forestry, the Kentucky Forest Leadership Program, and whatnot. So that's what I do. And how did I end up here? And which is an interesting thing because I'm a UK grad, and I started out in UK undecided, as probably a lot of us do. I'm not quite sure what I wanted to do, and I took a variety of classes, enjoyed a lot of different things. And I had a friend who had taken a forestry class, and because she thought that she wanted to do Peace Corps. So I'm like, well, she goes, it's fun. I thought, okay, I'll take this forestry class, see what it's like. It was evening, it worked with my schedule. And everything clicked for me. Then it was just like, wow, this is a really interesting subject. I want to know about the world around me. All of this stuff that I've looked at and appreciated all my life. I was in scouts and stuff. I didn't really know, and I wanted to understand about our forest and forestry. And I could actually make a career out of it too. And at the same time, that my career could be something that is what I'm doing now. It's education. That's kind of how I ended up here, and I loved it. It was a great experience going through the forestry program here at UK.
So that class kind of connected you to your future, basically.
Totally, yeah. And the professor was great. And Dr. Jim Renge, which I think he's been on before talking about careers and whatnot in forestry. He was our teacher, and it was just great. He could sit down and really talk with me about what my options might be. And even if I didn't want to pursue forestry, other ways that I could learn about our forest and our natural world. So it was a great experience.
Okay. So tell us, what is a tree?
What is a tree?
People see them.
As we look around, think about it. Here on campus, when you think about our trees, just think how important they are. Well, I personally think they are, and how much we enjoy them. We enjoy them because they provide so many wonderful things for us, so many benefits, things like shade. Walking around, as I was walking around campus yesterday, I'm going to take a walk again. That shade is wonderful, and the wildlife that we see in our tree, the homes that our trees, dead and living, provide for wildlife. The food that those trees provide for wildlife provide for us. We do reap the benefits of many trees and the fruit from that. Trees are really, really important at helping protect our air. They help kind of clean some of the pollution out of that air, like these natural filters. They produce oxygen. That's one of those big ones. When you work with the younger kids, they all know that trees produce oxygen and that they take in carbon dioxide, which are two biggies. They learn that early in school. They provide thousands of products. If you go to our website, Dr. Terry Connors actually has a list, and it's not an entire list, but there's thousands of products that come from trees, and not just from the wood part of it, but all the chemicals in trees.
I don't think people think about
absolutely not
all the wood that touches their lives.
Exactly. That you have no idea the things that they can make from trees, and it's usually just from the chemicals and stuff that come out of the wood, the lignins and things. So trees are really valuable for providing all our different kinds of products. And in urban areas, trees are important. I live in a neighborhood. and it's an older one, which I love because we've got a lot of big trees, and that increases. It's great for my house for one thing because it's shady in the summer, so it makes my utility bills be a little lower. I mean, it has wildlife out there because I like birds, so which is great. But it also increases property value. People may not necessarily want big trees in their yard, but generally, if you go in through, you can do a variety of programs. If you do the Adopt a Tree program, the University of Kentucky's Urban Forest Initiative, you can see how much your tree in your backyard, how much that adds to the property value of your house. So it does. Trees increase the property value of a home. They help protect, I worked at McConnell Springs at one point in time. The trees were very important to helping protect that waterway. They help hold that soil stable, help keep from soil runoff and whatnot. They helped keep it shaded, which was important for wildlife too. Create a good habitat. They're great for absorbing sound pollution. I know if anybody lives near like New Circle Road or the interstate, having a lot of trees in your backyard really helps kind of, knock
Lower
down that noise pollution. And another thing that sometimes we maybe don't think about, but we know it's true, how important trees are for us mentally and physically. When we go out to say Raven Run, which is one of the natural area parks here in Lexington, as is McConnell Springs, a very small urban one, but lowers our blood pressure. I mean, they've been doing studies on this now. We actually had Florence Williams, who wrote the Nature Fix here on campus this past spring, and that's what her whole book was about, was how important trees and forests are to us mentally and physically. So, I mean, trees are and they're incredible, and they're very, very important to us and provide us a lot of different benefits. So, yeah, trees are great. But to get to your question, I guess, what is a tree? If you can go to Merriam-Webster's and, look it up, there is an actual definition for a tree, and it is defined as a woody perennial plant, typically having a single stem or trunk, growing to a considerable height, and bearing lateral branches at some distance above the ground. So that's a dictionary definition. Now, when I was in dendrology, which is one of the classes here at UK in our forestry department, which is the study of trees, I think it's 219, FOR 219. Great class. Loved that class. When we were in that class, we kind of refined that definition a little bit more. We gave there a little more definition to the height, that this tree must be at least 13 to 15 feet tall, and we stayed with that single main trunk, and then the crown branching. But that we just kind of added the height thing in there, when we learned it. But so yeah, a tree is that woody perennial. The woody perennial is important, and having that single main trunk. Because shrubs, we have a lot of shrubs that are woody too, but shrubs generally tend to have multiple stems. And won't be quite as tall. We might have some that get 20 feet tall, but they tend to have multiple stems, not that single main trunk. So, yeah, kind of the definition of a tree.
Yeah. So Kentucky has a lot of trees, right?
Kentucky does have a lot of trees, and they're very important in the state. They say the statistic is about 48% of the state is covered in forest, and an interesting thing to point out, a lot of us always think of our forest land as being federal, we think the Daniel Boone, it's all in the Daniel Boone National Forest, and actually it's not. Over 88% of all Kentucky's forest land is owned by private individuals. So the Daniel Boone National Forest is a very small portion of the forest in the state. But like I said, we have about 48% of the state is forested, which equates to about 12.4 million acres, which is a lot. That's a lot of forest land, and that's a lot of trees. And because of that, the forestry and the forest sector and the wood industry are very important in this state. I'm looking at, which you can actually look this up on our website, the Kentucky Forest Sector Economic Report for 2017 to 18. And there it tabulated how much that the forest sector contributed to the state's economy in those years, and it was $13 billion. So it's huge, a huge contribution to our economy here in the state. Very important. And we may not realize that here in Lexington, but when you get out away from Lexington a little bit, you'll see more of some of that forest industry going on out there too. So yeah, very important to the state.
So what is it that sets the trees apart from other plants? Okay.
What sets trees apart is that they are that woody perennial, And we have shrubs and vines that can be woody and perennial as well. But being a perennial allows them to live for a longer period of time. And because they're woody, it allows them to grow. They can grow quite large. And if you think about it, we've got some, we have some very small trees, but we have some, you go out west, some really huge trees. But because trees and shrubs, but we're going to focus on trees, are able to create this woody tissue. It would be great if we had a cross section. We might maybe be able to put one up on our website. A cross section, which is like if you had cut down a tree, would be like looking at that stump or something out of it, of the trunk. If you were to look at the cross section of a tree or the stump, just inside the bark and outside the wood is a single layer of cells that are called the cambium. And that's one of the actively growing parts of the tree. And this layer that's right there underneath the bark, but right as the woods start, it repeatedly divides first in and then first out, and it creates all that new wood and the bark for the tree. So this allows these trees to grow larger in diameter each year. That layer, that cambium layer, repeatedly divides first in and then out to form the new wood, which is on the inside, and the bark, which is on the outside of the tree for that tree. And those different cells, they become different things as they move. The cells that are formed that move to the inside, that are formed on the inside, are called the xylem. And this makes up what we think of as the wood of the tree. It's basically all the trunk, and you'll have that in the branches and the twigs and the roots and everything too. The thing that really helps that makes this woody is that those fibers, this wood is made up of fibers that strengthen, but they're also strengthen the tree, but they're also hollow tubes of different sizes. And these tubes are kind of like straws. So the inside, the wood part that we think of that tree is actually, we call that the xylem, and that's what's responsible for transporting the water from the ground up through the roots up to the leaves for the tree. Now there's the cells that the cambium that are formed, and they're formed to the outside just underneath the bark there. That's called the phloem. And the phloem are the cells. Again, they're still fibers and they provide strength, but they are kind of like straws again too. They are the ones that are responsible for moving the sugars that are produced in the leaves down through the tree to the other part of the tree, providing that energy for the rest of the tree. So the xylem moves the water up, and the phloem, which is on the outside of the cambium just under the bark, is the part that moves all of the sugars and starches down through the tree from the leaves. It's really interesting if you get a chance to take a look at a cross section. There's a lot that's going on there with that tree. And one thing I was going to say I wanted to point out too, if you did look at a cross section, some of you all may have done this in school, had a class or something that you all looked at a cross section or a tree cookie as we call it. You also noticed that there are layers. It looks like concentric circles basically, and those are the growth rings of the tree. And those are produced, that's the xylem and the phloem. That's what's happening here as that tree grows bigger each year and putting on diameter, adding more cells, more bark and more wood cells. It grows bigger each year, and it does that during the growing season, so it creates a growth ring. Some trees it's easier to see than others, but you can actually count those growth rings to determine how old that tree was. And realizing that the ones closest to the center of that cross section are the oldest. The ones that are out by the bark are the very youngest, because that's where, as we said, that cambium layer is right there underneath the bark, the part that's actively expanding every year. So those would be the youngest growth rings on the outside.
Yeah, I know I've seen some tree cookies before that will have, Daniel Boone was here during this time.
Exactly, yeah.
And people date history by trees.
Right, exactly. I was going to say there's a couple of cross sections at some of the, if you're in Lexington, if you go to some of the natural area parks, they have great big tree cross sections, and they've sanded them down. They used oak. Oak is a really good species to be able to see growth rings in, but they've counted those, and I know the one at Raven Run was 1758. So a long time ago. So it's very interesting to look at those growth rings. And one thing I know we learned in dendrology, the study of trees, also was that as you're looking at those growth rings, that they're not all the same size. You'll notice maybe when the tree was younger, those growth rings are really wide, and that could be because the growing conditions were great for that tree. It was a new forest at that time, so it had lots of sunshine, lots of water, so it was able to grow really fast and have a great big growth ring. And then maybe you'll notice some years where those growth rings are really tight, those annual rings, you can hardly tell the difference between them. And those could be indications of other environmental conditions. Maybe it was a drought year. We didn't have enough water. Trees didn't grow a whole lot that year. Could be that forest got more mature, closed in, and those trees now competing with a lot of other trees for water and nutrients out there, so it couldn't grow quite as fast. So looking at growth rings is really cool, and that's actually a study. Dendrochronology is the study of growth rings and using those to look at past weather patterns, depending on where those trees are, and just to kind of figure out what's been going on with our climate over time, or maybe in that specific forest or something. Really interesting to look at the growth rings in trees. But I also wanted to point out, when you look at a tree, size does not necessarily tell you how old it is. So like I was saying, you can go see these big tree cookies at McConnell Springs or at Raven Run. Those trees were very old and they had good growing conditions and they grew large. But there are many trees, and I can think of down at the University of Kentucky's Robinson Forest, down in one of down the cove, the hollow down there are some sugar maple trees down there that are as old, and they're probably only like 4 or 5 inches in diameter, which is very small, because there are other trees near them that are the same age that are 25 inches in diameter. So size does not necessarily indicate the age of the tree. It has more to do with the growing conditions. Was that tree able to take advantage of it so it grows bigger? Or maybe like with those sugar maples, they've always been shaded out by other trees.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. This is Dr. Matt Springer. I'm an Assistant Extension Professor of Wildlife Management within the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources here at University of Kentucky. I'm here to teach you a little bit about the animals that live in our forests, especially those here in Kentucky. For those of you who might just be joining us, each week we'll play a wildlife sound from our forest. Here's our sound for this week. Stay tuned. Towards the end of the show, we'll talk about this animal and why it is making that sound.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview.
We've mentioned city trees and like natural areas and Robinson Forest. So what's the difference between a city tree that you would see and then a forest tree?
One would be just when you look at it. You know, a city tree, for the most part, if we're here on campus, most of our trees have big trunks, great, big, wide, spreading canopy. They're in an open grown situation. They're not, they don't have a whole bunch of other trees
They may
growing
be a street
around them.
tree and don't have
Right, so
competition.
they've got that ability to spread that crown out, grow a lot of leaves. It's not important for them to get super tall. They can spread out because they've got sun coming in from all around. Now in a forest, and you go to a more rural area, and I know we have students in some of our programs that rural and urban, and they talk about some see trees very differently in a city. You know, like trees are giant to them. In the forest, the kids are like, there's just tons of them out there, and none of them are necessarily huge. And that's because in a forest, those trees will grow much taller, but they may not get quite as, their canopies where all their leaves are and everything doesn't have that ability to spread out. They are reaching for the sun, and to reach for the sun, they have to grow their tops up much higher than they do in kind of an urban open area like we would see around campus.
So you've told us a lot about the kind of the parts of the tree. How do they grow? I mean, how do they get the energy to grow?
That's a very important thing, and one that is a review for probably a lot of us in maybe 3rd or 4th, 5th grade.
It's been a long time.
Well, if we think about it, we're in summer right now. trees kind of wake up in the spring. We have most of our forests are deciduous, meaning that they have leaves that they grow in the spring, develop throughout the summer, they'll change colors in the fall, and they drop. Most of our trees are deciduous, and so those leaves in the spring, that's when trees are waking up. It's getting warmer, that sap's starting to flow up. The ground's warmed up, so it's starting to flow up through the tree. The air is warmed up. We're going to start to see buds. If you know our trees, they've lost the leaves, and they had tiny little buds on those branches. They're going to start to swell, and we're going to see and burst, which was what we saw early in the spring. So new leaves would be developed, flowers, new shoots, they grow a little bit. And for our conifers, which are cone-bearing trees, and we always think of them a lot of like our evergreen or our needle trees. Those will also develop. They will put on some new leaves, but they don't drop their leaves, all of their leaves every fall. They drop leaves all the time, those needles all the time, but they're going to develop new shoots and expand those shoots and form new stems and needles, the conifers, in the spring. And then you come to what's going on now. Those leaves are out. They've been out during this growing season, and so those leaves are out there capturing the sunshine, and they're using that sunshine along with carbon dioxide and water, because they're taking in carbon dioxide through small holes in our leaves, which are you couldn't see, but the stomata. And they're using the carbon dioxide and the sunlight, and they are turning that into sugars and starches for that tree. Those leaves are essentially the tree factories, the food factories of the tree. But that process of these green leaves, they've produced this chlorophyll, that green pigment. Using that along with the carbon dioxide and water and sunlight, they will turn that in the leaves, they turn that into the food for the tree. And that's photosynthesis. So those sugars, as it's producing all those sugars, that's going to move throughout the rest of the tree, the trunk and the roots, and it helps that tree continue to grow throughout the growing season until we start approaching fall.
So how does photosynthesis work?
How does photosynthesis? Oh, that's a good question for a review from school.
I know, you're getting me way back.
I know. So in the leaves, and the chlorophyll and other pigments that are, our leaves are green. Chlorophyll is green, and there's some other pigments that we don't see right now. Those get unmasked in the fall. That's why we'll see our fall colors, but that's for another episode. Though they absorb the energy from the sun, and they store it in that green-colored microscopic structures called chloroplasts in the leaves. And so also in the leaves are these small holes, or on the leaf, which are called stomata, which that's where the tree is able to take in the carbon dioxide, because you've got to have the sun, and you've got to have that carbon dioxide. And so the tree then uses what stored energy it has to combine carbon dioxide with water that it's taken up through the roots, through the xylem, to make sugar. So it's going to make sugar for the tree, and it's releasing oxygen while it's doing it. So it's taking in carbon dioxide, using the energy from the sun with that chlorophyll, and it's producing sugar, and with the water producing sugar and then releasing oxygen. And so that's kind of the process of photosynthesis. So it's important for the tree, but it's also very important for us because it provides us with oxygen. And it's a good carbon sink too.
So how long do trees typically live for? What's their lifespan?
Trees have a variety of lifespans. There's huge variance in trees, and trees can range from a few decades. I can think of a lot of, like, sumac is a tree that we have around here. You can see it over around McConnell Springs. They actually have them labeled there. They have a little tree walk, but at that natural areas. Sumac would be an example of a tree that's short-lived, maybe 15 years, maybe 20. And things like peach trees, a lot of our fruit trees maybe don't live quite so long either, maybe 20 to 30 years. But then we've got trees that, like some of our oaks, we have a lot of oak forests here in Kentucky, can live to be several hundred years old, and depending on that oak can live to be almost more than 500 years old. And then there's trees like bald cypress that can reach up to 1,600 years.
Oh my!
Think about coast redwoods. We think about our trees out there in the Pacific. Some of those trees are 3,000 years old. So, and then the oldest one would be the bristlecone pine, and that can live up to about 5,000 years. So trees, we got a range
and where's
of
that one located, generally?
I think it's in like New Mexico, Arizona. It's more of a desert, but don't quote me on that. I'm not positive, but it's out west.
Okay.
Things like the bristlecone pine, they can live up to 5,000 years. So we've got trees that 10, 20 years up to 5,000 years. So just depending on that species of the tree, trees do have a natural lifespan, and obviously the environment plays a role in that as well too. But they do have a natural lifespan too.
So what about trees in Kentucky?
Yes, since we kind of talked about trees and we mentioned out west and whatnot, Kentucky, as we said, is heavily forested, and it's also very diverse, which I remember when I took dendrology was a little challenging. We thought at first, the beginning of the class, our professor was saying, Kentucky has approximately 120 different kinds of tree species. And that's an approximation, out there, but about 120 different tree species, which is very diverse. And it's diverse for a variety of reasons. I mean, if you think about our state going east to west, you've got the eastern part of the state very mountainous. You've got deep coves. You've got, those high mountains there. So you've got all different kinds of trees that can grow there, going all the way across the state, all the way over to the Mississippi River, where we've got swampland and a lot of different type of bottomland area for trees to grow. We have a huge variety of trees in the state, and a lot of it has to do with our topography, how it changes throughout the state.
Are most states like that? They have that many varieties?
No, a lot of states don't. Florida actually has a lot of different species, but some states, just depending on topography and also climate. We have a great climate for a lot of different trees, and we also have the Appalachian Mountains that have run down through here. So we've got some species that you may not find outside of that mountain range. So that helps us be diverse. Mm-hmm. That, like I said, that we are very diverse. And when I took dendrology, that was one of those things when the professor goes, well, we're going to learn about 100 different species. And we were like, oh no, how are we going to do this? We did, though. It was great. You learned them. But it can make tree ID challenging. But I was going to say, if anybody you think, wow, I kind of like this idea of learning more about my trees, on our Department of Forestry and Natural Resources websites, we have a webinar in the extension tab. There's a bunch of different webinars on tree identification, and so they're just PowerPoints, or you can actually watch the webinar, but it walks you through the basics of tree identification, the difference between needles versus our deciduous trees, what characteristics you should look at on those leaves to help you identify them, and then it also teaches you how to use a leaf dichotomous key, which is a great step-by-step little book that there's lots of different kinds of keys out there, but in the webinar, a little step-by-step book that teaches you how to use those leaves to identify that tree, those characteristics of the leaves. So if you think you're interested, check those out. And I think there's even some videos too that Doug McLaren had done a few years back, and he walks you through all of the different characteristics of the leaves to help you learn to identify them. Kentucky is very, very diverse in our forests. So it is very diverse, and it can be tricky. And again, like we said, we're very forested, so it might be something you might want to get out and try.
So you've talked a little bit about our forest in Kentucky, and I've heard about the Champion Tree Program, and I didn't know if you could tell our listeners about that program and some of the facts associated with that.
Right, we do. Kentucky participates in the Champion Tree Program. It's part of a national Champion Tree Program. But in Kentucky, it's administered by the Kentucky Division of Forestry. So you can find out information. You can actually type in Kentucky Champion Tree Program, and it'll take you right to it. It's hosted on the Kentucky Division of Forestry's website, and they keep the record of all the champion trees by species and where they're located. And in Kentucky, I just wanted to mention, we have the tallest tree in Kentucky. In Kentucky, that is a yellow poplar, which is the state tree of Kentucky. The species is the state tree of Kentucky, but it's 163 feet tall, which is quite tall.
It's quite tall.
And it's found in McCreary County. And it's on private property, so it's not available to be seen.
Some of these trees, though, if you look them up, you could actually go see them if you wanted.
Exactly, right. And you can just look it up to see where it's at. Some of them are in parks and whatnot like that. And then the biggest recorded champion tree in Kentucky by the Kentucky Champion Tree Program is a bald cypress, and it's in Ballard County, and it's over 34 feet in circumference. That's a huge tree.
That is
a
huge.
Very, very big tree. Fayette County is the county that has the most recorded state champions. We've got 10 state champion trees here in Fayette County, and actually there are There's, believe 2 of them are over at McConnell Springs, and they're sumacs. Remember we were mentioning, I mentioned the sumacs are relatively not a real long lifespan, not a big tree either. And if you go over there, you can see they've got their poster up talking about the 2 champion sumac trees over there, and they aren't big. They're about 6 or 7 or 8 inches in diameter, so it's a small tree, right?
So the champion,
but it's the champion.
But the champion trees, they're measuring tree height as well as circumference. I mean, you can kind of be a winner in either category.
Yeah, you got height and diameter, and we mentioned the Kentucky champion tree program. That's actually part of and feeds into a national champion tree program. So you can type in there, look it up. The national champions in Kentucky, we have 8. Champion trees, and that means that they're the largest specimens of their species in the country. So we've got 8 in this state, which is really cool, and 2 of them are here in Lexington. One is the American basswood, and it's at the Lexington Cemetery, so anybody can go see it. There's a sign out in front of it that says it's a national champion. It's up there by Henry Clay's monument, and it's a large tree. It's a beautiful large tree. And then there's the Ohio buckeye. It doesn't grow quite as large, but it's very large too. And that one, I believe, is actually over at the Lexington Diocese, which is on Leestown Road. It's in their front lawn there. So another very large tree, and those are 2 right here in Lexington. Wow. Those are national champions, which is really kind of cool.
So the biggest tree in the whole country and this species is here in Lexington.
Yes, exactly. Cool. The biggest basswood in the country, the American basswood, is here, and the biggest Ohio buckeye is here in Lexington.
It's here in Kentucky.
Right, exactly. Not in Ohio.
Not in Ohio.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So you talked a little bit about the Kentucky trees. What about tree species worldwide?
Okay, well, like what we said, we estimate throw out that number of about 120 different species in Kentucky. The worldwide number of tree species was recently updated by scientists from the UK-based Botanic Gardens Conservation International.
And that's the United Kingdom.
Yes. Sorry, I said UK. United Kingdom, right? Correct. Not the
We
University
have issues with that all the time, being UK.
Oh no, the United Kingdom-based Botanic Gardens Conservation International, and they have compiled. They said it's the first ever comprehensive list of all known tree species, and that number came in at over 60,000 different kinds of trees.
Oh my goodness!
Right, and I was kind of reading through some of their stuff. There are some where there's only 6 known individuals of species, and that was someplace in Australia. Just a small little area, what remnant left, 6 known species of one tree. So pretty interesting, and it's really awesome that they've compiled this list. And it says, they said it's the first ever comprehensive list, but can you imagine doing dendrology for the world? 60,000.
So I guess 120 is not too bad.
Exactly, not bad at all. Not bad at all.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview. Well, you've got some great information about trees, and for those that hopefully found this interesting as well, how can they get involved in things like that? What else can they do if they like trees and want to get out there?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to get involved, and here in the Lexington area, in the spring we usually have a program called Reforest the Bluegrass. Happens in April. You'll probably hear lots about it. It's always in the paper. And that's an opportunity to go out, learn about trees, and help plant trees. So that's a really fun event. A lot of communities, even outside of Lexington, do similar types of events. And then we also have in October, this will be the second year in Fayette County, and actually in surrounding counties too, is Tree Week, and it's celebrated in October. And so be looking for information on that, because every day of Tree Week, there will be some kind of new event, different event going on at a natural area, maybe at a school or at a library. So check out those 2 things, are ways to learn more about trees and the importance of trees in our environment. You could even get involved through the University of Kentucky's Urban Forest Initiative Adopt a Tree program, where you can become a tree keeper. And I believe they've talked about the Adopt a Tree program on this program before, but that's where you find your favorite tree, you measure it, you provide information to the website, take a picture of it, write whatever you want about it. And they also, within that program, it lets you know how important that tree is to the environment. It tells you about how much stormwater that tree is capable of uptaking, how much carbon dioxide that's taking in, how much oxygen it's producing, shade, and all that good stuff. So that's a really interesting, fun, active program. You could do it with a tree in your backyard. I've done it with my family. So that's the Adopt a Tree program. Get involved in, obviously, Arbor Day. In Kentucky, we celebrate Arbor Day the first Friday in April. Nationally, it's celebrated as the last Friday in April. And there'll usually be an Arbor Day festival at the University of Kentucky's Arboretum. And that's usually at the end of the month of April. And it's a day dedicated to trees, learning all about trees. Here in Fayette County, there is a tree board. Get involved there, find out more about what's going on with your urban trees. You can become involved in things with the Daniel Boone National Forest to find out about, national forests, what's going on out there as well, too. Plant a tree. I mean, that's always a good thing to do, is plant a tree. But if you're going to plant a tree, make sure that you follow some really good guidelines about planting the right tree in the right place. So
That's important.
You don't want to put a big tall tree underneath the power line. And make sure, if you've got trees and you want to take care of them when we have really dry periods, help them out, water them. You want to mulch them, take care of it around the base of that tree, learn how to properly mulch a tree. And I know there are a variety of publications through our extension service that talk about mulching a tree. That'll help you so you don't run a lawnmower up against it, or a line trimmer where you might damage that bark or something like that. So just those are just a few ways of maybe getting kind of involved with trees, maybe learning more about them. I mean, there's a lot of other opportunities, and I know here at for the students out there who may hear this, we have classes here in the Department of Forestry. That's how I got into forestry, was taking Forestry 100, learning more about trees, a variety of classes you can take here in this Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. But for people, if you're a landowner, or maybe not even, you don't own a forest land, but you're just interested in it, I know through our extension program here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, we do the Woodland Owner Short Course usually July and through August, and they're spread throughout the state. So you can find out where those are this year and each year if you just go to our department's website, and there's usually one of those banners up that talks about this Woodland Owner Short Course, and you learn all kinds of things about trees. I do teach tree ID at that one, so you go through step by step how to identify a tree, how to use a dichotomous key, in addition to other things of helping to take care of trees. And if you got kids, or you're a younger person, we do through 4-H. There's a variety of programs for natural resources. We do 4-H forestry field days, and we do those across the state, and you can find those on our website as well. And those are days learning tree ID, you learn how to measure a tree, and then and a variety of other things with a lot of other students from an area around you. For high school students, there's the opportunity to go to the Kentucky Forest Leadership Program, which is a week of being immersed in a forest, learning about trees, learning about the wildlife, learning about the insects that might be out in that forest, and you're out there in the field for the whole week. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved or to learn more about our trees and just how important they are to us and our economy and our world and our well-being.
Sounds like all year long there's something you can participate in.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
go ahead. I was going to say, we'll definitely post all those items on our website so they can have the quick links to those. One thing I was just going to mention, you mentioned the FOR 100 course, which is it's now called Forest and Forestry. So for students that are here at UK and are interested in taking that does count towards one of your Science UK core credits. So, if you're, whether you have a different major or thinking of forestry, that's a course that's kind of an introductory course to talk to you about that. And then the other one you mentioned, FOR 219, Dendrology. That's another one. But and
that's when you really want to know more about trees.
That's when you're ready to learn.
And you really will. And a lot of great field trips. You're going to visit a lot of different natural areas, so you can see all the different species of trees that we have here in this state. Yeah. So it was a great class.
No, and so we've done a show on forestry careers. So if you think this might be interesting to you, just go back and listen to our forestry careers Careers podcast, and you can learn about the different classes and, from a student's perspective and things like that. So, we've got some great information, and we'll definitely post all the links to these places. And I know you mentioned the YouTube thing that Doug McLaren had done some tree IDs, so we'll make sure we get those links up.
Right, and those do that. So if you just want to watch a short video instead of going through a whole webinar, you can watch Doug's. Most of those are, I think, 5-10 minutes. Yeah, you can watch how to identify a tree.
No, that's good.
You mentioned watering trees. Is it important, like if you're a homeowner and you have a tree in your backyard, but it's an established tree, is it important to water it?
But there's certain species that are more susceptible to dry periods, like yellow poplars. We lost 2 of them out at McConnell Springs, even watering them. What I would say is if you've recently planted a tree in your yard, you want to make sure you water it. You might want to, if you're not going to get out and water it every single day, you can buy these things called tree gators. Or the water bags that you put next to your tree, and it's slowly releasing water, until that bag is empty. Because it is very important in that early establishment of a tree for it to get plenty of water, to get those roots growing, to get established, to make sure that you do water it.
So you've presented us with some great information about trees today, and thank you for that. And so what would be, 1 or 2 takeaway items that you want to leave our listeners with?
Wow, trees.
Trees are good.
Trees are good. Trees are great. How important they are to us. If you haven't before really thought about them, go out and check out a tree today. Just really look how interesting the bark, the leaves are. Look at what's living around it, how important it is, how comfortable it is in its shade. And maybe that would be just, my takeaway. If you hadn't looked more closely at a tree, dude, just one maybe even today, that would be a good idea.
I think sometimes we take trees for granted
Totally.
because they're there.
Right. They're always there.
Yeah.
They don't move. They're all, It
Right.
seems like they're always there until they're not there, and then
Right.
we miss them. So, I think just to get out and think about that tree and what it's providing, maybe wherever the environment is, what it's providing and how important it is.
Just like every person has characteristics, every tree does too.
Exactly.
So
Right.
go out and learn those.
I know.
All right. Well, thank you, Laurie, for joining us today. If you'd like more information on what you've heard in this segment of today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned now for Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
So today on Wildlife Sounds from the Forest, we have a special guest, Dr. Ellen Crocker, Assistant Extension Professor of Forest Health. But she's here to help us out with Wildlife Sounds of the Forest. And let's hear that sound one more time.
Okay, Ellen, I think we all know what that sound is.
Yeah, sound a little bit familiar. Have you heard that before, Renee?
Yes, but not that many. Just maybe 1 or 2.
Wasn't it just relaxing?
Oh, yeah, no.
So I actually found this on a YouTube video titled The Healing Sounds, 9 hours of amazing relaxation. And as you might have guessed, these are honeybees.
Right. Yeah, no, to me that would be them coming after me, not relaxation. Yes.
Yeah, I think that might take a special person to find that sound relaxing, maybe a beekeeper. And here with us today we have a beekeeper, Doug McLaren, to tell us about the relaxing sounds of honeybees.
Well, we'll get to the relaxing in a minute, but thank you very much for having me here today. But I'm a very small novice beekeeper, but what you heard there was probably a hive of 30,000 or more bees.
Oh.
And the thing is when you open that hive up to inspect it for whatever you need to do, you recognize the fact there's 30,000 of them, and you want to keep them relaxed, and not so much. And so you're always a little anxious when you open that box up, and you want to make sure that they stay calm.
So is that a typical hive number?
30,000, yes, 30,000 at least. Wow. 30,000.
So that's the sound of honey in your mind.
Yeah,
right?
it is. And what's an interesting little fact is, one honeybee can only produce 2 tablespoons of honey in their lifetime.
Wow.
So you go into a store that has honey on the shelf, and you start measuring tablespoons, and you recognize that it takes 30,000 bees to gather a whole lot of honey. Yeah.
So one thing I found interesting is that there are hundreds of thousands of different species worldwide of bees, but only a few hundred of those make honey. And only honeybees, only this one bee makes enough of it that we use it to make honey. Is that right?
That's exactly right. There's just a few that are sold here, or that are produced here in the Americas to produce honey. And yes, there's a variety, even native. These are not native bees. These are all brought in. But the native bees that are around here, very few of them produce the scale of honey that is needed there. And they don't have the numbers.
But even honey aside, our honeybees are really important for pollination as well. So they're not our native bees, but they are used in the agricultural setting to pollinate a lot of the plants that we eat.
Exactly. And you read article after article that the concern is if these honeybees are destroyed in any way, shape, or form, it is going to affect that particular geography, as well as if the whole population is destroyed or hindered in any way, shape, or form, we're going to have a problem in the agricultural community.
So I've noticed on the shelf you can get clover honey and you can get these different kinds of honey. So how does that work, and how can you even tell that it's clover honey or whatever kind of honey?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues going on there too, as far as clarification on what you're getting. What they're saying is that they have collected this honey in a highly populated clover area.
Okay.
And another one will say black locust, sourwood. And basically what they're doing is they're collecting the honey at the end of those flowering events for that particular species. And the thing is 30,000 bees are not going to just go out and collect honey from that.
That's what I was like. I don't think that happens.
We do not have.
They didn't get the memo. They didn't.
That's what I was going to say. Is we don't tell them in the morning. This is Clover Day.
A PowerPoint presentation.
Right. So basically, it's. Geographically, there's a particular blossom, and so they'll collect the honey from at the end of that cycle of that particular blossom, but it's not pure.
Okay, so when do they actually produce honey? What time of year?
Very interesting. Bees will be out all year. Again, if it's a very cold day, what they'll do is they'll stay in what they refer to as a cluster. In the center of that hive, there's a ball in there. And that ball is protecting the queen, of course. And what they'll do is the outside bees will eventually work themselves to the inside, and they just keep moving around in mass. But they just stay in that cluster until springtime. And as soon as anything becomes available, February, things start coming out, February, March, and then it's a whole big season up until late October. There'll be things out there available to them.
Okay.
One other little tidbit of information you may not know, and that is honey will crystallize, which means it turns hard, and that can happen due to the amount of moisture and such things. And the thing is, it crystallizes, turn hard, but you can uncrystallize it by simply putting it in warm water, and it goes back to its natural runny state. And the thing is if you have found honey, it's hard for us to do this, but if a scientist found honey from Cleopatra's time, not a thing wrong with it. It's still viable materials, not a thing wrong with it. Just melt it down so that it becomes honey, and it does not spoil. That's the nice thing about honey.
That's interesting.
The sugars in there don't spoil like the sugars that we know of.
Do you know how long a bee's life is?
We're talking weeks. We're talking 2-3 weeks maybe. You've got to remember that they have to go out in the morning. They have to find the areas, although they communicate with one another where the best place to go is. But if they have to travel long distances, that means their life is probably going to be much shorter because of this traveling that they have to do back and forth, back and forth. So if you're able to create, just like Ellen has said, if you can create a pollen population for them close by, these things will live a little longer and have a lot less stress on their life.
It says in their lives, a worker bee would fly the equivalent of 1/2 the circumference of the earth.
Oh
So
my
can you imagine
goodness.
a tiny little bee
Yeah.
flying that far, wearing its wings out,
Yes,
all to make
exactly.
us honey.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and talking about bees.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like more information on anything you've heard, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the Central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.